Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Triad Table. We are back, and we're so excited to be here. Today, we are going to be talking about visits and reunions. We have a lot of different perspectives and different voices always on the Triad Table, but this topic especially, all of our adoptions look different. So really excited to talk about this. I am going to pass it right over to one of our Triad members, Claire. She has, if you've been following along, she has been going through quite a journey right now. And we'd love to hear, Claire, give us an update on what's going on with you, and we'll just go from there.
Okay. So when Hope introduced this topic with visits and reunion, there's a few directions to take it. And so by now, all of you that are probably watching this know that I am an adult adoptee from a closed adoption, which meant that visits, weren't really a thing for me. And so I never had those opportunities as a child, which I'm sure you'll hear others talk about open adoption visits during this video. So really for me, visits happen in reunion. And so I personally don't think reunion should even be a thing. I don't think you should have to reunite biology to begin with. But here we are. So I have been in reunion with my birth family on my father's side for maybe about 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years. And then I recently reunited with my birth mother a few weeks ago. And I won't rehash all of the details of that story, but I was able to finally reunite with her. Unfortunately, she was very sick at the time that I was able to actually meet with her. And she did recently pass away. So my message and mission is that I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how visits and reunion look. And they can look a whole host of different ways. But in my case, on both sides of the coin, paternal and maternal, reunion is really difficult. And so it's not something that you pick up after 30 something years and instantly connect. There is an instant connection because that's your DNA, but you're basically trying to rebuild a relationship from the ground up. And so there's always going to be a lot of expectations from all parties involved, myself included, have and had a lot of expectations. And my birth mother had her wants and needs and what she needed from this adoption, and then my birth father and all of that family. And so I think that the most important thing to me, and I think the most important thing that adoptive parents and birth parents can best understand is that when we talk about whether it's open adoption visits or reunion that turns into visits, we have to keep the child in mind and we have to keep them at the center. And it doesn't mean that you don't communicate your needs, right? It doesn't mean that birth parents don't get to communicate their needs. It doesn't mean that adoptive parents don't get to communicate their needs, but it does mean that when the adoptee is able to have agency over, their needs, that we're definitely listening to them. And I'm very fortunate that my needs were respected in this situation with my birth mother. because they weren't for a very long time. And I'm just incredibly thankful that, it's a combination of her and her family opening that door, but also me being empowered enough to advocate for what I needed. And so I think that that's the single most important thing we can do, is making sure that adoptees feel that empowerment to advocate for what they need. And so, yeah, that's kind of the way I want to kick it off, because you know me, I'm always about adoptees. So I just, I want to keep that in mind, that, everything looks a little different, but man, once we get an opinion, watch out.
Claire, I appreciate all that you said. I wrote down a couple things that I'm going to mention, but I just want to say, you have the adoption community, the Instagram adoption community following you and rooting for you. And I'm just thankful that you're there sharing your story, because you felt empowered to advocate for what you needed. And that's going to empower another adoptee to do the same. And so I'm just thankful that you're sharing your story, as painful as it may be. I really liked how you said reunion shouldn't even be a thing with your biology. That's a big point to call out. And I don't feel like we always go to the professionals first, but I do want to get the professionals' take on, Carrie and Vicki. Reunions shouldn't be a thing. She's right. You shouldn't have to have a reunion with your biology. That we should be talking about visits, and reunions shouldn't even be a thing. So I'd love to get your guys' take on, how are you addressing visitations? How do you handle reunions when a birth mother that placed, maybe entered a closed adoption, now has to, is trying to do a reunion? So I know that was two questions. So whichever one you want to pick, I'd love to, hear your take.
You want to go first?
Nope. All you.
Well, initially, to answer the first question, we also believe that reunions shouldn't be a thing. We believe wholeheartedly that a child has the right to have a reflection. I'm sorry. See, Carrie should have went first. Y'all always make me boo-hoo on here. Anyway.
Oh, sure. It's my
but every child deserves the right to have a reflection. Every child deserves the right to know where they get their natural abilities, their gifts, their talents, all of those things. Every child deserves that right. And I agree with Claire that is not an adoptive parent or even a birth parent decision. That is their right. And so for us, that is just something we stress like a lot when we're doing matching, and because I have a birth mom right now who's like, no, I can't do visits. I can't do this. I can't do that. I'm like, yes, you can. But we're slowly wearing her down, bless her heart. She got in touch with us earlier in her pregnancy, so we got time to wear her down. But but there's don't be shaking your head. You know it's the truth. So anyway,
you do not wear people down. I would like to go on the record and say that.
No, but from an outside perspective, I get what you're saying, because what that birth mother could be feeling in 5 years if she doesn't advocate for that. So we get you, we feel you.
Yes. And so that's what I just keep talking about. So she's coming around. Like at first it wasn't even gonna get pictures. Now we're like at email and she's gonna get pictures, and you know what I mean. So slowly, chipping away. But anyway, but with that, and then with adoptive parents, we have some adoptive parents who think it just blows my mind that people still think that having access to their birth family is harmful to the child. I mean, just this morning, I read like 5 research articles where it's proving more and more where children are healthier when they have access to their birth families. So it's just, it's this whole, like, I don't know. Carrie used a phrase this morning in something that we did, like, there's just this whole mystical culture that has, engulfed it, that we just kind of need to start busting busting bubbles, I guess is the best way to say it. Reunion, how we handle that, we work really hard with adoptive parents to prepare them that even though right now she may be going into something that's closed, it's never going to stay closed. So if you're wanting like a forever closed adoption, we're not the people you need to work with, because one way or the other, she's going to come back and want access, or that child's going to start asking questions. And I have found that children are asking questions earlier than what they used to. Like 4 years old, 5 years old, they're asking questions. And if you haven't maintained that relationship, I mean, you're just kind of sitting there and your kid's looking at you like, why don't you know? You know? And so, but reunions are tough because everybody's just scared. That would honestly be everybody's nervous. And like what Claire was saying, everybody's got expectations. Everybody's got different visions of what it's going to look like. And I think the best thing we can do as adoption professionals is help manage those expectations and try to make them a little bit more realistic so that a reunion can go a little bit smoother. But I do like what she said, because reunions are really about the child. I mean, I know the birth mom needs them, but they're really about the adoptee. And so even if like the adoptee's 10, if the adoptee's 30, if the adoptee's 12, I think having an open conversation with them about what it is that they're expecting. And then if you can manage that, because adults can be adults if they're forced to be, and just kind of tell them to bracket their emotions. And let's focus on, like, if the child wants you to hug them when they see them, then you be ready, even if you're uncomfortable, to give a big old hug. You know what I mean? Like, whatever those things are, I think that that's how to do a healthy reunion. But I've met a lot of women, and Carrie can attest to this too. Every time we go to a conference, every time I speak at something, I have women who come up almost like sneaking in, and they'll say, I'm a birth mom, you know, and they whisper that they're a birth mom. Or they'll come and tell me how like horrible they did finally meet their child after 35 years, and how the reunion was just such a mess and created even more trauma. And that makes me sad, because, you know, I don't know how else to say that, but that makes me sad. But I'll hush it. I'm sure Carrie's got something to say.
Now, I just wanted to say, you know, Vicki and I had a call with prospective adoptive parents that are matched with an expectant mom we're working with. And it's interesting because, like, in the situation description that we put out, we put out what she wants right now, but we also put out with the voluntary post-adoption contact agreement, because remember, I love a voluntary post-adoption contact agreement that is enforceable. Go Georgia. And we always send that like a sample copy, because I don't ever want anybody walking into an adoption with us and be like, oh, I had no clue it was enforceable, and I had no clue that this language was in there and that. So I'm like, read it before you even like send me your profile, because I don't want to deal with you. But it's interesting because, you know, that confuses parents, because they're like, well, but we talked to her on the phone and she doesn't really warrant that kind of openness. You know, for us, we try to prepare, you know, the expectant mom. And then, you know, if she does decide to make an adoption plan, birth mom, we try to protect her for what she might want in the future. And I think that's rare in the adoption professional world. I think that, you know, a lot of times they're just like, oh no, okay, well, that's what you want, that's what we're going to put. But I think that we have to think outside of where she is right now, because again, you know, I go back to Ashley saying to us several years ago when she came in and did her training with Abiding Love of, I'm pregnant and I need not to be. I'm in crisis. And my thought process is, you know, I got to work through a lot of things, right? And that's what you said. And so she's not thinking, what is it going to look like in 5 years or 3 years or 10 years? But we as the adoption professionals should be thinking about that. We should be working with her, you know, emotionally and talking with her, and then also legally preparing and protecting her in case she wants to walk through those doors.
I always love when you guys talk about protecting birth moms, which you do. Expectant mothers and birth moms, almost every call. So I really enjoy that. Because I think back to my situation, and even Ashley, you've talked about this before, that what I wanted when I was an expectant mother was way different 2 weeks after I gave birth. Like, even a year, 2 years, it was so different. I thought I didn't want I didn't want contact. I was way wrong. So I love that you want to protect that. I did want to comment on something Vicki said, and I wanted to get Ashley's take. And Allison, you too, as an adoptive mom, I always find that when I go to visits and when I go see my son, I never know, am I allowed, like, if he hugs me, should I hug him back? Or if he's like, wow, we do this the same. Like, I always wondered, am I allowed to do that? And, since then, like his adoptive mom, we've had those conversations, but it's always just been this thing of what's allowed and what's not. And I liked, Vicki, how you said, like, that a child has the right to the reflection. And if your kid wants to hug, like, your birth mother or birth parent should be hugging, because it's the adoptee who dictates those conversations. So I really like that. And, like, Ashley and Allison, whichever one goes first, I'd love to get your take on just visits and how you navigate that. Like, what's too much, or what's, especially as an adoptive mom, actually, I'm curious, like, is there something that's too much for you? Or, like, I just would love to get that other perspective.
I'll go first. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so I think that, to speak to the first thing that like what you just asked me, the most important thing for me as an adoptive parent is differentiation between my own fears with the visit and my child's fears with the visit. Like, and it's only because I'm a mental health professional that I can call out my own projection. So I would encourage people to understand how much we all project all the time, and how visits, I think, that can come out, like whether it's fear or whether it's anger or whether it's resentment from that one time she didn't call, or like whatever it is, like the visit is when that's going to come back up. And so being aware that the closer you get to the holiday or the visit or whatever it is, that being aware that that will come up, and actively, like proactively figuring out what's mine and what's theirs, and not projecting, is, I think, the biggest thing. And then back to what I kind of wanted to speak to, what we were talking about protecting the future birth mom's like choices and wants that she doesn't even know that she'll have. Another thing, like, I don't know, I've never seen statistics about how many, like what percentage of birth moms have like legitimate trauma from their backgrounds, but from things that I've heard Ashley say and others say, it's like, we're probably dealing with someone who has experienced trauma, right? When we're talking about a birth mom, and the brain of a traumatized person doesn't differentiate from like what's happening now from what I will want in the future. Like, it's very, very difficult to for someone with trauma to have this concept of what's happening now that is absolutely unbearable will end. Like, this temporary nature of all things is something that's really, really difficult. And so I just want to, like, first of all, commend our professionals that are here and who are taking that trauma-informed approach, and then also speak to it to hopefully foster some empathy for people whenever they say, well, she said this, this is what she said she wanted, oh, that one time 5 years ago, that's what she said she wanted, shocker. And so I just think that's kind of, from a clinical perspective and a trauma-informed perspective, that's something that's really important to remember. That concept of what's happening now will end. That's really, really difficult for people to make decisions from if they've experienced trauma.
So just to kind of piggyback on that, because I had taken some notes and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. When you get into the brain science, and if you follow Andie and Allison, you learn a lot about chaos process, and that frontal lobe issue shuts down, and you're trying to process like realistic expectation and things like that. And so And no woman that gets pregnant that's considering adoption isn't in some form of chaos, whether it's within the pregnancy itself, whether it's within all the fires at home, whether it's within generational stuff. Like, we don't come to the table considering these options: abortion, parenting, single parenting, placing our children without some form of chaos. It doesn't have to be, the whole big shit show, but there's always something that would lead us to this. We're not surrogates as birth mothers. And so if we need to understand the difference, that we aren't doing this out of the goodness of our heart to help this. That's not how it starts. Whether we shift into that perspective or not, that's not how it starts. So we all come to the table with a little bit of chaos that doesn't allow us to actually process long-term. Everyone talks about, like, look big picture, like you need to be able to be forward thinking. And I'm like, are you shit? Like, I can't even think past like how I'm going to get fed the next day or something like that. Right. So to have a group like Abiding Love, Vicki and Carrie, and we've talked about this so many times, about being able to manage expectation in crisis really is important. And I've been listening so much, as I've been, for those of you who don't know, my son that I placed for adoptions, he'll be 15 in the spring of 2021. And he actually just came to have a sleepover. We've been a couple of years in now with sleepovers, and he's going to be 15. And now we're talking about driving and shit, and I'm just like, nope, no, I'm not. But I can promise you 15 years ago, when I was in the hospital, the conversation that I had about open adoption doesn't look like sleepovers and our kid getting ready to drive. And so having professionals that can come in and manage a little bit of not grinding them down. Like, I know we're joking about that, but really being able to say, look, I get it, but we're not going to close this off. And my son and I didn't have contact for the first 5 years. But I also, I talk about, and then we, but it wasn't reunion. It was just silence and managing expectation of grief for the adopted parents coming in, to understand that just because we're in seasons of silence doesn't mean that we don't still have an open relationship. We have an open a door relationship, right? The door's open. We can come in and out. But I couldn't be present. However, there were still ways to connect and still information. And so then when I came back, we didn't have to put all the trauma. Now, granted, it wasn't 30 years, but we didn't have to make it this big, huge traumatic reunion. It was just, she couldn't be present and now she's here. And how do we dictate that? And I'm trying to differentiate, and I'd love to hear the adoptees' perspective on this, between being silenced through grief and just flat out closed separation. And so there's a lot of information. And when you get into right to privacy and right to information, Derek had all of his information. My son knew everything, and they were still writing letters every month and things like that. So I think it's very important to understand the difference between allowing birth mothers to have their seasons of grief, having the professionals help adoptive parents manage that expectation and keep the adoptees connected to their adoption story, even if I can't be present. It was really interesting. Claire asked a question when my son came and did this last sleepover. We work really, really hard. We talk about keeping our child at the center of this relationship. Every single person has commented that it needs to be about the child, their needs when they get old enough to express what they want. And I think I do that really, really well. And I can show up and hug him and have him sleep over, even if I'm like, oh my, I can't do this. So I have to process my own mental health after he leaves and keep my shit together as an adult, like I'm capable of, so that he can have what he needs. And Claire asked a really interesting question. And she said, with all of that work that his mom and I do to keep him at the center and make sure that he has this space to love us both and blah, 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 do we give the same space for him to actually be angry or bugged or hate? Or does he feel like that's more pressure to keep up because he knows how much you love him and how hard you work? And I might be slaughtering this, Claire, and I would love to hear if I'm like ruining this, but like, does he actually have space to say, man, if I have negative feelings, they have loved me so well, is that okay? And so I'm like, well, how do you balance that? And so I think it's just constantly keeping that communication open and saying, hey, look, I can love you all day, regardless of whether you can be present or not. And when I think about him having sleepovers and then one day saying, I don't want to come sleep over anymore, I can't imagine him not wanting to come and sleep over anymore. But I don't get to project that on him. I don't get to project my heartbreak about him maybe finding himself in a space where he can't do that anymore and put that on him. I get to handle my shit privately and then do what they did and say, when you're ready to come back, I'm here. I have an open door for you. You had an open door for me, and now I have an open door for you. And if you can't come back, then you can't. So where's the balance? I don't know. But right now, what I know is that we show up and we process. And if he needs a sleepover, we get our shit together and have a sleepover. And that's all I know that we can do right now. And right, I mean, I don't know, right or wrong, I don't know. That's just what we're doing.
Yeah. And so I remember that question too, because what it comes down to in my mind is that I am so interested to hear from adoptees like Derek, when he is old enough to, process, his own adoption story, because adult adoptees in the community, me, and I know, Tina and Andie, we watch you and we watch, your triad and all of that work that goes into it. And it's really, truly a beautiful thing. And I mean, like, in my mind, I'm like, who has sleepovers with their birth mom? Like, what is this? But I think it's awesome. And I think that that's such a gift for Derek to have that relationship. And it's truly, and maybe gift's not the right word, because it's hard work. It's not something that's just happens, it's people showing up and being present and doing the hard work. And so where that question came from was me personally as an adoptee. There's always some kind of level of maintaining some kind of balance or status quo when it comes to expectations. And whether that's me assuming expectations or people putting those expectations on me, it can go both ways. I'm constantly living in this balance in reunion of like, I feel really anxious and nervous about this. Like, I mean, I will get physically sick, like when I have to go visit with birth family. It doesn't mean anything against them, but I get physically ill. And it's like being able to being empowered enough to advocate for myself and say, actually, no, I know we're here for a full weekend, but I'm going to take 4 hours on Saturday morning and I'm just going to spend time at the hotel, or I'm just going to go to breakfast with my husband or something like that. And just being able to say what I need. And so really, Ashley, I think like that question really came from that, is like, hey, like, what happens if, like, does he have space? And I know the answer is most likely yes, he does. But, I think sometimes as adoptees, we don't verbalize our needs all the time because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And also we're afraid of people leaving, we're afraid of people saying like, you're making this too difficult. I don't want anything. I mean, like, I'll use myself as an example. I mean, I, was in recent reunion with my birth mom, and, I went and stayed at their home. And for one night, I didn't stay more. But that was really difficult. And it's not something I expected to do, but I did it in that moment because I was so fearful that if I didn't just go with the flow, that, I would be considered difficult and not worthy of being present. You know what I mean? For for even like spending time with her. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do all these things that you want me to do. And I'll jump through this hoop over here, and then I'll do this over here. And I had to really take a step back and say like, no, like I need space to deal with this on my own. And I was able to do that. But like, you know, I'm 35 and I still have problems with it. And so, yeah, I think Ashley, I mean, you answered that question so beautifully that like, you know, expectations might have to change at some point. And that's okay.
Yeah. And I just, one more thing on that. Like, I really believe, like, I'm really excited to see adoptees that are like my son's age 10 years from now, that get to come to the table and say, this is what our journey looked like, and how different the narrative, the potential that we have to change a narrative of generations, which I think is exciting to be able to say that we've learned so much, but we couldn't have done that without learning that much. And it will be very interesting to know what his narrative is going to look like in 10 years. Cause I think we're a little bit away from really understanding the open adoption, you know, voice of the adoptees. And so we're really still trying to process. I think we're a ways away from those adoptees to really be able to share in that space. But I know and you know, it's always that balance. Like, does he ask to come and sleep over because he wants to, or because he feels like he's hurting my feelings if he doesn't ask? Because I'm listening to adult adoptees that feel like they're pressured to do this. And then I'm listening to Derek saying, no, I want to come. And so I'm like in the middle going, I'm in this middle of this generational gap that's saying, this is what adult adoptees feel, but I'm trying to raise in this open adoption my son, that 10 years from now, what is this narrative going to look like? It's tough. It's a tough space to sit in when you want to be present and learn, but also be present with your own. I don't know. Anyone wants to comment on that, I would love to hear.
I just want to make one quick comment, and then I want to hear from Tina. So get ready. So Claire, similar to what you're saying, like sometimes you need space and you feel like if you ask for it when you don't know what's going to happen. Like as a birth mother, I'll feel that like, okay, I can't take another minute. Like we're singing Christmas carols in the summertime right now. We're having so much fun. Like I need to go have a breakdown really quick. And then I'll come right back. But then I'm like, am I going to, is he going to be mad? Is his mom going to be like, why is she crying in the bathroom? All these different things. And then I get in my head and I start to think, is he feeling this way too? Like, does he want to be with me? Or does his mom say, your birth mom is coming. Let's have a really fun weekend and all of these things. Like, I never know the happy medium. So I'm on the other side of the triad, but I'm with you. I think it's all, it's all confusing. I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know, will we ever know the answer? Like,
I mean, I think it's just different relationships, right? Like I just didn't grow up having visits with birth family. I mean, like the first time I saw a picture of anyone that even looked like me, I was 33 years old. And so for me, it's just so different because I'm basically trying to rebuild a life that was never really mine. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's hard because like I want nothing more than to be with them and have them integrate seamlessly into my life and into my family, but that takes a lot of work. And so I'm only 2 years in with my birth father side of the family, and I'm 3 weeks in on my maternal side. And so it's just all very new. And honestly, to me, this comes down to having the correct support in place for women, birth mothers, adoptees, adopted parents. Like we have to be supporting the whole triad through these relationships because we each have to be able to feel empowered within our own thought process and be able to like take that step back and realize that like that negative talk, that like reel that's playing in my head of like, oh, if I say no to this, like they're not going to talk to me. They're not going to do this. Like, that's not true. Like, we have to, that's what therapy's for. And so, you know what I mean? Like, I'm a huge proponent of therapy and like mental health support. And I think that that's severely lacking in this community, and it's not accessible to so many people. And I have that luxury, and that's a privilege. And I don't, I'm not blind to that. And so, I just think that that's what it comes down to is being able to say like, this is really hard, but I'm going to do this because I know this is what I want and this is what I need. And I'm going to stick it out, and I'm going to figure out a way that it works for me. And I think it goes for all sides. I think it's everyone. It's not just, adoptees that are having these thoughts and these feelings. I think it's everybody. And I just think honesty and communicating, what you need, and that's all you can do. I know that sounds oversimplified, but we'll see if it works. TBD.
TBD. I think everybody on the phone would agree that if communication could improve, all of our lives, even outside of the triad, would get a lot easier and a lot more smooth. But Tina, I'd love to just get your take on, this specific topic, being adopted from foster care, and just really your perspective on all of this.
Yeah, so I think like what Claire said, it goes back to support for the birth mother. And I think that I've been speaking a lot on siblings and foster care and stuff like that through my internship. And I keep getting this one question of like, well, how do we make like sibling reunification or visitations work? And I keep saying, and kind of like what Claire just said, like it's not just one side of the triad or even one side of the adoption or foster care situation. Like it's the adoptive parents, it's the foster parents, it's the social workers, like everybody has to work together to make it work. And I think that especially like in my situation, which was dangerous, nobody was there to help my adoptive parents in visitations or anything. There was no education. It was the year 2000, 1999. There was nothing. Like just here, oh, here's these children, and yes, they have a dangerous family, but we're not going to provide you with any training. We're not going to provide you with any support. You just got to figure this out. And you know what happened? My adoptive parents didn't have support. My birth mom didn't have support. So 20 years later, there's no visitation. There has been none for 20 years. I have not seen my mom. So that's what happens if you don't support, there's no opportunity for visitation. And in my situation, especially, and maybe even in Claire's too, like it's not just the birth mom who has failed, like it was the adoptive parents too. Like you can't just throw children at them and be like, here, figure out how to do this very unnatural thing on your own. So I think that, yeah, it comes back to support, and everybody has to be helping everybody else, or else we don't know what we're doing. And the adoptive parents can't do it by themselves, and the birth parents can't do it by themselves. And, I look back at my situation, and, my mom, she's like, I wish that we had more help because we didn't really know what we were doing. Like, we didn't know. Like, we were in, like, up to here parenting you both. And so, unless somebody's going to come alongside and say, this is, how you do it, especially in situations like mine where you can't just message them on Facebook and be like, hey, you're our child's birth parent. Like, can we meet? Like, that can't happen in my situation, So I think that, yeah, it just comes down to the support. And I mean, my story and Claire's story are very big testimonies of what happens if you don't, like, nothing happens. Like, there is nothing. I have photos and I have my brother. So I have those biological mirrors and connections, but we have nothing else. Like, we have some letters from when she went to foster care, and, she wrote us, but that's it. We don't have anything else. And, like Claire said too, like whenever we do I do anything, and I know I've talked to her about this, like whenever I do anything towards that process, like my entire body just shuts down. Like I'm done. Like I haven't even met the lady in, a long time. But my body shuts down when I get ready to maybe possibly write her a letter. So it's like our bodies are just like so like tight and anxious, and we don't know, how to handle that well. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just really complicated, like everybody's been saying. But I think it does come back to, you need the support. Everybody needs the support. You can't do it by yourself, and no one side of the triad or even like adoption or foster care situation knows how to do it by themselves.
I think there's always a common theme throughout every single triad table that we've ever done, from that first one to today. And it's a theme on every single talk, all throughout the conversations. Everybody mentions it, is the support and education. I feel like a lot of the issues we talk about and a lot of the failures and a lot of the conflict all comes from the lack of support and the lack of education. And we all feel it in different ways and in different forms. So, I'm really glad that first off, we have adoption professionals here who are helping with that. We have people like Ashley who are literally trying to get support groups within, what is it, like 30 miles, every 30 miles around the nation. Like, we cannot
coast to coast,
coast to coast.
Yeah, 30 miles. Miles from coast to coast.
Yes. And I have no doubt in my mind that you and your team will do that. Not at all. I know you will do that. So I just, I think that if there's one thing you can always take away, is that if you don't feel like you have support, and maybe your adoption took place 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or my first support group I went on that was actually one of Ashley's support groups during COVID, there was a woman who was like 60 years old on it. And that was her first support group. Do you remember that? It was her first support group she'd ever been on. And I just think that,
do you remember that? How crazy was that?
Yeah.
60,
I just was
like 60 years.
Yeah. I was in shock.
Yeah.
Because I just thought this woman went through all of these trials and tribulations without any support. And we're all sitting here feeling that. So, and Andie, you just sent a comment and you mentioned something earlier. So I really miss you and I need to hear your voice. So whatever you want to say, just say it. We need to hear your voice.
So I was on late because I legitimately fell asleep putting my children to bed, and then Claire's text message came through. I was like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, I have so much to say. And my dog just busted in, so you're going to hear him. So my adoption was originally private and became open, and I wrote letters, and it was my parents who surprised me with reunion with my mom. Like, legitimately, hey, your mom's in the next room. Do you want to go meet her? I used to love that story. I used to love it so much. Like, when I was in the fog, what a great story, right? Now I hate it. I hate it because I was ambushed by both sets of parents. And this goes, I can't, not my bio dad, he wasn't there, but I was ambushed by 3 parents. And I want to go back to what Claire was saying about how a lot of times adoptees are put into situations where we feel completely out of control. We feel completely, we can't have an opinion. And the best way that I can verbalize my reunion with my biological mother is I never had a voice. I was not allowed to have a voice. My biological mother loves the story of us, but she doesn't love us together in relationship. Why? Because she didn't do her work. Why? Because she didn't have support. And you were talking about that birth mom who was 60 in her first birth mom support group. And I can guarantee that's probably going to be my mom. I don't have communication with her currently. And that's my choice. I think that what happened is that we went in full force, and for 13 years, I went head on in because I was trying to soak up as much biology as I could in those visits. And we jumped right into overnights. We went from writing letters to shortly after reunion, I went and stayed the night at her house, and it was horrifying. Like, I met my sister, I met her then husband, I met, oh, and by the way, the night that I met my birth mom, I met her entire side of the family 5 minutes later. So, this whole concept of, I kind of did a 180 where for so long in our relationship, I didn't have a voice. The expectations had never been discussed. My adoptive parents were pretty good. I think my mom said one time she was upset that I was leaving halfway through the day on Christmas to go to my adoptive mom's. Like, she expressed, I wish you didn't have to go. One time though, that was it. And she understood. She's like, I know this is part of the deal, but I love you, you know? But she didn't stop me. She just was like, I don't like this. One time though. But the expectations on all sides were not discussed. We were going in blindly. And so after 13 years of not having a voice, I did a 180 and I started having a voice. And when I started speaking, when I started owning my side and owning my trauma and saying, I'm uncomfortable, I don't like these expectations, no one discussed this with me, literally, that's when, you know, the poop hit the fan and suddenly I was no longer lovable because I didn't fit her expectations. And so for me, it just comes down to that whole, I didn't have a voice. And I think that each part of the triad needs to have their voice, and it's a balance. And we have to be making sure that, you know, now that I'm the adoptive mom, I need to be making sure that my daughter is going to be healthy enough to have her voice, so that when it comes time for her to choose whether she meets her mom, she can be honest with me, she can be honest with her mom. And it's also, you know, we're in that communication right now. We're starting to develop that relationship so that no one ambushes her in reunion. And she isn't in reunion for 13 years and suddenly realizes that she probably didn't want to be in reunion right then. So, I mean, I could talk for like hours on this subject. But yeah, like I said, it all comes down again to that support and the lack of it. And, you know, I just think of how many adoption therapists we have who are truly adoption informed, not just adoption informed, but like truly in it. There's so few. And we're just lacking in that area. I'm gonna stop talking.
I want to say something to the concept of not having a voice, not having agency, not having any control in visits or anything like that. We were talking in the chat over here about, you know, when it's appropriate to start including the child in that. And it got me thinking, you know, I said as early as it can be communicated, but then I immediately thought of my own child who his verbal communication skills might not ever be, you know, developmentally at the same age as his actual age. And so I think what we have to do when our children are young is presume that connection, that biological, presume that connection is something that their nervous system needs, that their brain needs, something that they need for long term. The ambush situation that Andie described could have been avoided with some form of genetic mirroring touch points throughout life, you know, even if they were sparse, and communicating. But even when communication, even when verbal communication is absent for one reason or another, whether it's a disability or just a child who is having trouble expressing themselves when it comes to their adoption, we can presume that trying is a good idea based on what adult adoptees are telling us, you know? And so I was talking to another adoptive mom who adopted a son he's like 9 now, and currently nonverbal or partially verbal. And we were talking about that. We were talking about how everyone seems to be talking about how soon do you tell your child that they're adopted? How soon do you, when do you include them in these decisions? And I was like, I just presume a lot of things based on what people like Claire and Andie and Tina have said. And I think that that's okay. And then also, a big part of my adoption education over the past 4 years has been broadening my idea of who I'm here to serve and who I'm here to love, from just this one child who gets to be mine to this entire biological tree that I'm not part of, but they are. And those folks deserve to have that child's presence as well. So not only listening to adult adoptees to inform our decisions for our adoptees, whether or not they can talk, but listening to biological families who are speaking out about what it meant for them to go 5 years. When Ashley talks about going 5 years and then having the relationship that she has now, I'm like, there's hope. Like there's hope, so there's hope Baker. Anyway, so all that to say, I feel like I said like 10 different things, but I think that we can assume that that is something that our adoptees want, but that openness of asking them, of like maintaining very, very clear lines of communication. And I'm not saying every adoptive parent can do this without a ton of help, but open lines of communication for them to express that in whatever way possible is really important.
We're going to jump over to Vicki, but I just want to say I literally chatted Allison when she was speaking earlier. I'm like, can you run a session with me and my son's mom? Because I feel like you do things so well. And I just always appreciate your opinion. I think that if you don't follow Allison, you should go follow her to learn more about her story. But Vicki, over to you.
Just one thing, I have children at different stages. So I have an 18-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, and I have a 7-year-old. And they all have different forms of openness, where we have a lot maybe with the paternal side, a lot with the birth mother side, a lot with the auntie and granny. You know what I mean? So it's like we're all over the grandpa, the maternal grandfather, like we're just all over the place. And one of the things that I've done since my 18-year-old is I'm a big, huge proponent for counseling, mental health check-ins, all that stuff. So we started with my first son, at about 4 or 5, doing what we called family checkups. And we don't do them a lot. We do them like whenever we need them. And that's how I learned a lot about the brain science and all that stuff, and when it was okay to introduce something and when it wasn't okay, and age appropriate truth, and all of those things. And so for me, I'm a very, if y'all hadn't figured this out, I kind of say what I think. And so my poor birth parents are like stuck with me. So I'm just kind of like, hey, we need to talk about something. It's not going to be fun, but we need to have this conversation. And I even have one birth mom who was like Ashley. She just kind of checked in and out for the first 5 years. And she's the one that I'm closest to now. I mean, like she comes when she wants to. To my house. And so, but anyway, to say all of that is we've always just taken the approach based on advice I had been given all the years, is I talk to my kids. I mean, I talk to my kids. I talk to my birth parents. I'm like, look, he doesn't even like me right now. He's probably not going to like you either. So just know that this isn't personal, but he don't want to hang out with me. He's probably not going to want to hang out with you. But he's just going through a phase. He's a teenager. And then just other things, like when one of my sons, his mom's different. I love her with all my heart, but she's different than us. And, but that's what makes her cool at the same time. And so, it's neat that he's got these two just different things, but he knows that it's all good, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But we talk about it. We just, like, even when he was 7, he's just one I would use as an example. When he was 7, he was like, she wanted to see him. And I was like, hey, you want to go see so-and-so? He's like, not today. I'm like, okay. And I told her and I let her know, and she was hurt. And I was like, look, he's got 5 boys out in the front yard, and they're all going into the woods. He is not interested in you or me. This has nothing to do with like you. You know what I mean? And then she called like a week or two later, and she's like, does he want to see me? I was like, hey, you want to go see her? He goes, yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, he was just a kid. I mean, and so we've just kind of taken that flow, and I have found for us, it's worked. You know, they've all been comfortable enough to tell me, hey, you did this, that hurt my feelings, or why do you think they said that? Because that hurt my feelings. And I've just been really blessed. But we pushed and we worked to get to that place where we could talk. It was not comfortable. It was very uncomfortable for all of us, but you know, but we've also allowed our children to have the same voice. And so they kind of get to dictate too how often and what pictures are hung in their room and what pictures are not hung in their room, and just, you know, all of those things. So that, if I can give anybody, communication is key. I mean, it's just it's uncomfortable, but everything about adoption is uncomfortable. So, you know, embrace the uncomfortable, embrace the awkward, and let's rock this train, because we can do it. We really can, if we'll just, again, act like adults. So that's my 2 cents.
I love your positive attitude there. And I got to tell you, I just like envision like this happening to me where my son says no. And there's been visits. And as soon as you said that, you know, there's been visits that I've requested that have been turned down. And part of me started to think, well, maybe my son didn't want me to come because he had a birthday party that he wanted to go to, or, you know, all these different things. And gosh, it makes me want to cry thinking about, right when you said it, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to go upstairs and cry myself to sleep. But, you know, it's not necessarily about me, right? I still remember the first time a couple of years ago, my son said he hated me. I was there on a visit and he's like, I hate you. And I know that, like, it's not he hates me, his birth mom. It's that he's frustrated that we have to leave the pizza place. So he hates me because I'm trying to help get him out of there. And I had to like remove, okay, he doesn't hate me, his birth mom. He just hates me because I'm telling him to do something. Normal, take a breath. So I really, Vicki, that really helped. I just opened something in my brain that, wait a second, it's the woods. And Allison, you wrote that. It's about the woods. It's not about, he doesn't want to see me, or your son doesn't want to see his birth mom. So I appreciate that. But Claire, I know we're going to be wrapping up soon. So Claire, I want to hear, I know you've got more to say and we need you. So take it away.
Yeah, so just really quick before Andie wraps it up, is I wanted to just say that, you know, a lot of the time we're so focused on things that are difficult or hard. And I think a lot of the time we talk about that lack of support, like Tina said, for adoptive parents, and like they don't have a manual for how this is supposed to look. And so, I mean, I just wanted to speak to that, you know, just using my parents as an example. And, you know, if I know you guys have all followed my story, but for people that haven't, I mean, like, there's a lot of things that went wrong. There's a lot of things that were overlooked. There's a lot of ethical issues in my adoption. But at the end of the day, you know, my mom and dad truly always were doing the absolute best that they could. Oh, sorry, that's my garage. If you hear that, it's really loud. So maybe I'll wait till that closes. Give it a minute. My husband's working out downstairs. Okay. So they absolutely did the best that they could with the very limited knowledge about adoption that they possessed. And so, you know, I will say that for adoptive parents, that in my opinion, the single best thing you can do, and you know, Allison and Vicki, you guys have given great, you know, you're living examples of this. The best thing that you can do for your child, even into adulthood, is literally just being available. And recently when I went to Florida to visit my birth mother, it was a very tragic and like emotional reason for me being there. And I went by myself because it was like very short notice and I have 3 kids. And so I didn't have the capability of bringing my support person, which is my husband, who's come with me on every single reunion visit ever. And so I was like, I already felt very isolated. And my parents, they talked to me that first night I was there. And of course, I'm putting on a front, right? I'm like, it's fine. I'm fine. Like, again, trying don't want to disturb people. And my mom texts me and just says, we're driving down and we're staying in a hotel. She said, if you need us, we'll be 10 minutes down the street. If you don't need us, we're leaving on Tuesday when you leave. And to me, I instantly felt better because in that moment, I'm sitting down the hall from my birth mother and my grandmother, but I needed my mom and dad. And I think sometimes adoptive parents get stuck in this fear that they're not enough and that, they aren't doing enough. And we're going to have these deep connections to our biology and they're going to, it's going to push us out. And I think that that's a real fear, but we need our moms and dads. And just as much as we need our birth parents and birth family. And so that one act of just simply being available was huge for me. There was no like assumptions, no expectations. It was literally just like, we are here. And that's it. And so if, that really is my advice, like out of everything that we've talked about, is just having that support and having that availability is huge. It makes the world of difference to us. If we're able to have that.
Can I just say really quickly, Claire, I love what you just said. And I just love how you are saying about the good things that your adoptive parents have done and how they have helped and encouraged, because I think that also needs to come out in this. I think that, we're in a really unique place right now, which I love that we have adult adoptees that are speaking out and talking. And sometimes I feel like it's all what they didn't do right. And so I also love hearing what they did do right, because I talk to a lot of adoptive parents who are like, I hear all the bad things and what do I do to make it good other than the opposite of what the bad things the people did? So I just want to let you know, I love that. And thank you for bringing that out, because I think that gives a lot of hope to adoptive parents too.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. Claire, I just want to, I think it goes really deep in my heart as a birth mom to being available for your child no matter what. It goes back to it's just the woods. It's not the birth mom or whatever. It could just be the woods. But still being available. I think that's really a big thing for me to remember at all times, and other birth mothers and adoptive parents, and, being, even if the contact isn't wanted right now, being available for that is really important. And you're right that, what you said, you do the best you can with the information you have at the time. So I really thank you all. We're going to pass it over to our closer. Wouldn't be a Triad Table without her. Andie, take it away. Close this out.
So the other day I was listening to a podcast by Adam Young. If you don't follow this podcast, I highly recommend it. It's called The Place We Find Ourselves. Adam Young is a therapist and a former pastor. And he was talking about the creation of Adam and how Adam had the perfect relationship with his father and mother. God gives us both fathering and mothering, and Adam had this perfect relationship. They commune together in ways that no other human will ever know. And yet it wasn't enough. God literally created us that he was not enough for us. And so he created Eve. So he developed human relationship. And it wasn't until there were two humans, until there was human relationship, that it was enough. And I just think, you know, I'm sitting here as an adoptee and adoptive parent, and I know I want to be enough for my daughter, but I know I never will be. I can't be, because she needs more than me. And that just goes back to relationship for me, where we have to work at these relationships because we are created to be in these relationships. And when we step into adoption, which kind of doubles the amount of relationships that an adoptee is going to have. Sorry, my cat's sitting here really annoying me right now. Just leave him be. Just leave him be. My animals keep trying to break in the room. Where was I? These relationships where we each, as parents, we want to be enough for our kids. And I think this goes towards any regular parenting. We want to be enough, but we have to understand when we're sitting with our adoptees that in this situation, we're not going to be enough, no matter whether we're the birth parent or the adoptive parent. And we have to work, like we've talked about this before. This is kind of what I took away from this conversation. Number one, we all have to work through our stuff before we come to the table, and we have to keep working through it. And we as parents, as an adoptive parent, I have to provide opportunities for my daughter to work through her stuff. And then I have to let her work through her stuff when she's an adult, because she needs, Allison put this in the chat, is all about agency. Our children, me as an adoptee, I didn't have any agency. I just got that at like 37. I finally have agency in my adoption at 37, even though I've had an open adoption. So we all have to work through our stuff. Adult adoptees, we've got to work through our stuff before we come to the table. We talked about, we need that support. We have to have that support. We need professionals who are trained in adoption, who have experience in adoption, to show up for us. We need agencies to provide that support 37 years down the road. So I can call my agency and say, hey, I'm 37, just coming out of the fog. Do you have a therapist I can talk to about this? We need family therapists so that all three parts of the triad can sit together at the agency and talk to each other about expectations and communications and trauma. And we need these supports provided to us. And discussing the expectations, even if it's not in therapy, just the ability to sit in the hard places, like Vicki was saying, and have those really uncomfortable conversations, and to allow our adoptees, for me, you know, as the child in this situation, I'm always going to be the child in the situation, whether I am one or not. For me to have a voice where I can say to my adoptive parents, here's what you did wrong, here's what you did right. And I can say to my, you know, my birth parents, here's what I need from you. Can you show up for me? Also, you know, for me to learn to take that, but I need to have my own agency. And again, just coming back to that point where it's the relationships. And like Claire was talking about, how even, you know, adoptive parents, my adoptive parents were amazing, even though they ambushed me. They did so much for me. They still continue to do so much for me. And I'm able to overlook some of the things they did wrong because of grace. And we need to sit in these relationships. We need to understand, like I said, all of these relationships aren't going to be enough for each point of the triad. I'm never going to be fulfilled by my birth mom. I'm never going to be fulfilled by my birth parents, because I need all of you to show up for me. And we have to give each other grace as we sit in these complicated moments and we struggle and we wrestle with things like visits. And, you know, is our adoptee going to say no? Is our adoptee going to unexpectedly show up at our house wanting to come over without, you know, a phone call or a text because they're upset and they need you? Is your adoptee going to tell you, I don't want to be at home this Christmas, I want to go to my birth mom's? Can we sit with each other in those moments in grace and love each other, knowing that each of us isn't enough? Open-ended question for us all to think about.
Andie, I just have to say, it's funny that you weren't on for the opening, and Claire had mentioned that being empowered to advocate for what you need is so important. And that's really how we started, and it's how we ended. So I love that because you weren't even there. So it just worked out.
You didn't even text me. We didn't
No.
even communicate.
It was literally, so I love that. So everybody, thank you so much for joining another session of the Triad Table. We're so happy you're here, and we will see you next time. Thank you.